Today's class will be covering everything in inventory usage, inventory functionality, and best practices on using the inventory module in the RWriter software. I want to give a thanks to one of our good clients that allows me access to his computer and software and his database. So we're looking at a real shop. And we'll be going through his setup, and then I'll be seeing things that I would recommend changes in his, and we'll see how it will apply to yours. So when I first talk about inventory, I want to keep things certainly based on the average service center. And as we move into tire shops and doing tire inventory and inventories that are 100,000 to 500,000, we certainly have plenty of clients that have that. But in this case, we're going to look at the average shop and then how you should have your inventory dialed in as a service center. So the first thing we're going to look at on an average service center is just the stock value report. And when we look at this, you're going to see that my average client in just a basic inventory of oil filters, oil, BG products, that type of stuff, you're running anywhere between $10,000 and $15,000. So this is what we're going to talk about typically, but certainly everything applies going forward. You'll notice that in this case that his parts departments, you'll notice that we have some blanks. We got $690 cost of blank departments. So if I wanted to see which parts are blank, I'd simply go down to the stock value detail report, which is the detail of this report. And you can see the very first ones, and I'm going to show you how to quickly clean up your departments that don't have any department. So all your parts should always have a department assigned to them, so you can look at your batteries, you can look at air conditioning, and you can see every part that's in each parts department. So with that, what I want to talk about as people keep coming on board is the setup. So it's one thing to look at the reports. It's another thing that the setup is very, very important when you're doing it. So we're going to start with RWriter's configuration, and we're going to go to configuration, and we're going to go to parts. And you'll notice under parts we're going to have taxes and fees, set pricing method, default inventory pricing. We're going to have parts department groups, and the first one I'm going to talk about is your parts departments. So under parts departments, you're going to notice that this is where we want to have our recommended parts department groups. Parts departments. Under each parts department, like batteries, you're going to have what your multiplier would be. You could have 5 pricing levels, and then what your minimum margin is for that department. What we want to look at is, just like if we were looking at parts departments, is one of my recommendations, a non-inventory part would be dealer parts. So based in your reports, I want to be able to know exactly how many dealer parts I purchased, and then what my cost and selling price was for that. So departments let us do more than from a reporting standpoint. So everything comes down to the reports. And then also under parts, we're going to have parts groups. So under parts groups, we're going to set up different groups. I'm going to just quickly look at the maintenance group, and then under the maintenance group, you'll notice that I just set up a oil filter department that has not been assigned to a group. Now, this is where all your departments should be assigned to a group. From a standpoint of best practices, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but also I'm going to go ahead and add the oil filters to the maintenance group. So underneath each group is where we set up each one of your departments. That way, when you're looking at reporting, and I'm just going to jump to reporting, and we look at the itemized sales report, and I go to reports, and I'm just going to put this to the screen real quickly for a month. The group lets you see the group that you pick, like we have a battery group, and underneath the battery group, we have batteries. And this is where I like to be able to see, under that department, how many units I sold of that group. And then the group also lets me see the margin under the group. So I can see that I sold 5 batteries and actually made a good margin on batteries. I can look at BG products. I can look at dealer parts. So the groups allow me to separate by a group and then the departments inside that group, so I can look at margins. So the groups become important for reporting and also for doing your inventory. So a little bit more time we'll be talking about in a different training video, tracking cores and returns and running reports on that. So back to your configuration, setting up your groups. You'll also be able to, what is important is under your parts is setting up your pricing method. So under parts inventory, you have the ability to use matrix pricing and linear pricing. You can do it by a department or by a supplier. In this case, I'm going to always recommend that you do linear pricing by department. So that would be your default for your parts in your inventory. On outside purchases, linear pricing by supplier. The other thing that when parts are not in inventory, like a oil filter or something that you normally stock, my recommendation is you also still use the parts not in stock, still use the parts in inventory rule. So we'll still use this same rule if the part's not in stock. That way you're not pricing something a lot higher or lower than you normally would have priced it based on what your inventory pricing is being. Then you have a button that has to do with inventory. I'll get in more detail on each one of these buttons. But again, just an overview of setting up your pricing. So underneath that pricing, when we look at parts, we're going to be looking at your parts, your default inventory pricing. Because we set that up, we're able to see based on departments like batteries, we can set up linear pricing for those departments, and we can actually do updating, and we can do different things with the pricing matrix. And then we also can look at a sales analysis by that department or that we set up. So in that case, we'll spend a little bit more time in that. But what I really want to get into is the benefit of having your inventory set up correctly on your most common parts. So when I look at this, and in this case I did an oil change, and I have an oil change on an invoice, I'm just simply going to click on the oil filter to use this as an example. So you can see that we have a line code, which is extremely important in cataloging. We have a part number, and we have the description. So if I was to search inventory, you're going to see that I have 2 on hand. Now, to show you how that works, I'm going to go ahead and go to inventory, and this lets me see the template of that part in inventory. So this becomes your inventory. So again, as we like to teach, I want you to be able to look at each screen. Again, you got your part number, your description, your line code. In this case, I did a package ad of $5. I'm going to show you what that means. We've got our cost of $1.49. We want to sell it for $5.25. You can see it's in the filter department. If I went to other information, you can see the number of sales you had each month for that particular inventory item. From that, you can see you're averaging on the low side usually 3 up to 6. So when I start teaching inventory best practices, what we want to do is maintain enough filters. Now, in this case, when I'm ordering my filters every day or once a week, I want to create a week's supply. In this case, my highest sale was 6. But in this case, we're going to keep 3 on hand. We've got 3 on hand. we want to stock the 3, and I want to reorder when we sold 1. So the reorder level is at 2. So the minute I sell a part, and you can notice that this is committed, meaning that it's on an invoice. So that committed lets us see how many I have left based on. Now, the committed only is on invoices and it's not on estimates. So if you were to put that oil filter on an estimate, it would not show it as committed. Now, to show you how that works, I'm going to go ahead and just change this quantity to 2. So when I change this quantity to 2, and then I go and I search my inventory again, you'll notice that I only got 1 left. So if I go to inventory, you're going to see that I have 2 committed, meaning there's 3 on hand, 2 committed. There's only 1 left to put on another vehicle. So this is why it's important that, number 1, the line code's correct, the part number's correct in order for it to catalog. In this case, I'm going to change it back to 1. So you can see at 3 on hand, we've got 1 committed. Now, just to show you how it interfaces with the Smart Jobs and SmartyCat, is if I were to go in and look up and do an oil filter. In this case, I'm just going to go ahead and do the oil change again. I'm not going to look up I'm simply going to look up that that oil filter and that oil, and you're going to see when it does its lookup that when we did that first lookup, we had 2 in stock. Even though we had 3, there's only 2 available. So if I put that on the invoice, then it's going to say there's only 1 available. So this is why it's important to have your line code set up in your Smart Jobs with that supplier and pulling from your inventory. You can see your cost, and you can see it's pulling from that list price that you have set in your inventory file. If we were looking at that suggested selling price from the manufacturer, you could look at that if you wanted to. So again, this is where you're looking up your inventory from SmartyCat, and you're looking up inventory, pulling your inventory. So it becomes really important that we have batteries set up, we have your oil set up, and in this case I noticed that when I went to batteries that the batteries weren't cataloged. So when I see real quickly and just go in here, and let's say I'm doing a quick search and I want to type in a battery to see if I have a battery, and I just simply double click on batteries. Because it's not set up in my inventory file, it's simply going to go to my local suppliers. So in this case, I can see I don't have my battery set up, so it's always pulling. So this is why it's important on your inventory to set up all your lines, set up your line codes, so that it pulls from your inventory, and we'll discuss that a little bit more as we're working on our inventory items. So with that, with your inventory, of course, I can always go to click on add a part itself. If I'm looking up a part, then again, that's when it's going to show you your on-hand quantities. Again, if I were to put that on an invoice and looked it up again, then it would just drop that on hand to 1. You also have the ability to do quick search. So if I wanted to do a quick search here and I wanted to type in oil filter, I could do that. And this is simply going to look up anything that you would have in your inventory, either stock or non-stock. And then what you'll see is that on your non-stock parts, it becomes best practices to remove parts that you no longer stock. So they're just not showing up. So you don't see those show up, and you have an issue with that if they're non-stock parts. So in that case, again, we can look at how easy it is to remove your non-stock parts. If those have built up over time, there's some different ways we can move them very quickly. So again, looking up inventory through SmartyCat or just on an invoice itself. And in that case, I'm going to go ahead and jump into the inventory module. So in the inventory module, you're going to see when I went to go to inventory and I went to view, add, edit, this is going to be what we're looking at as far as the information on a particular inventory item. And so we can pull any one of your inventory items. By doing the lookup, you can notice I'm just going to go ahead and edit this. Normally you'd want to set up a passcode. And this is where we can edit one part at a time. What you can't edit is the part number, but you can edit everything else. So this is if you were changing supplier, if you were fixing the line code, if you went to other information, you can even go and make notes on a part. So if you wanted to put what that part fixed, or if that was a special order item, or where you could got that, then you have a note screen. If it was tire, you have tire information, and oil with oil information. So what we're going to key on right now is looking at the supplier themselves and the department. So this has become, and then if you wanted to do inventory entry, adding a bunch of parts, I'll be showing you that, but this is where you could enter a lot of the same parts over and over again. It would maintain the part description, it would maintain the department, the supplier. That way it keeps all the information, and you're simply just changing the part number and the cost and the selling price on each. So inventory entry is for and when you click on inventory entry is for entering a lot of parts, new parts into your inventory at one time. We're going to spend a little bit of time on browse, because browse is where we go in and actually do all your inventory. This displays all your inventory on one screen. I'm going to show you how to use that in depth and how we're going to do some cleanups. Post parts receipt would simply be receiving one part at a time. So if you were to receive parts in the inventory, now what I'm going to recommend and discuss in this training class is using purchase order management for receiving parts if you're going to order parts. We'll spend a little bit of time on that. But if you're just going to receive, you've got two parts you need to receive on inventory. Let's say in this case I ordered some PO 4457s. I received two. If the cost had changed, I'd put the new cost. If the new cost had changed, then that's when it calculates your average price. So if my cost went up to $1.55 and I hit OK, it would average the number I have on hand and give me the average cost of that inventory product based on the two I just bought for $1.55 and the one I had bought for $1.49. So it's going to track that, and then I've got to do not adjust the retail pricing. So if I clicked OK, then that's going to receive one part at a time. Adjustments would be when I went and counted inventory, and I went and counted your inventory, and I wanted to make a change. It's simply going to say your current on hand's 3. You counted it and you have 2, and you're going to say I lost it or parts missing, and this is tracking your parts adjustments once you go count your inventory, and you make your parts adjustments from there. Purchase order management is where we'll spend a little bit of time in being able to order parts. If we optimize our inventory, ideally you would just simply be ordering your filters every day. That way you put an optimized number of oil filters, air filters, what you stock on the shelf, and you simply would go, I want to automatically order everything that I've sold from Pro Auto Parts, boom, and then it just simply says I need to order one of those oil filters and simply places those all on. Oil filters along with one cabin air filter, four oil filters, and then I need a cam alignment shim. So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go in. I'm going to go ahead and go back here just so I can show you how the reports work. Purchase order management. Transfers are when you have multiple stores and you're transferring out of your inventory into another store's inventory. Core returns are simply that, any of the core returns you had. Part returns are that. Global pricing, we'll spend a little bit of time on that, but I want to jump into reports. So again, the key to the system is setting up your departments, bringing your inventory in, and then the best way to do your inventory is literally take a blank piece of paper, write the part numbers down, put the quantity on hand, and then just know that your inventory is right to start with. So a lot of times we'll have people ask us just to zero out all their inventory on hand and just do a clean count to start the month off with. In this case, if I wanted to do a parts reorder report, it's going to be very similar. I'm just simply going to pick on Toro Auto Parts, and what you'll see on the parts reorder report, it's going to look exactly the same as that alignment shim and that cabin air filter and the full oil filters that you need to order. It gives you your cost of the total of those items, how many you got on hand, if any are committed, what your reorder level, your stocking level, and how many you need to order. So this would be if I was not using purchase order management. I simply wanted to print this out. I wanted to adjust the orders. A lot of times we'll print this out and then we'll go over to purchase order management and use this sheet as ability to place that purchase order. So in the case of this, that's just simply your parts reorder. You're going to look at your parts stock value report, which we looked at a little bit earlier. This is simply the inventory that you have on hand. Again, now it's only picking one supplier, so I'm going to go ahead and take off Pro and go to All Suppliers, and then that shows me all my inventory for my stock value. Now, if I wanted to print out a list, what becomes important when we're looking at our inventory list is if I want to print it, I want to group it by sort by just a description, or I want to group it on a department. I just want to group it by, so when I go count, I can count by department, or I can go in, and this allows me to look at. Now in this case, I'm going to go ahead and say no grouping, sort on part numbers, and I just want to look at my consigned parts. So when I go to print that, what you're going to see is this is going to be all the batteries I have for consignment. So it lets me just real quickly print a list and then go count my batteries. Now you'll notice here that I've got one of my batteries that doesn't have a line code. The ACD is not on that 27PG. So this is why it's important that when you see something like this, that you go ahead and understand the importance that it can't catalog that part and remove it from inventory if your line codes don't match. So this will be important for you to just go in, and that's where the inventory view add edit works, that I can real quickly just type in ACD 27, and there's the battery. In this case, I want to edit it, so I'm going to go ahead and add that line code and save that, and then that would fix that line code so that could catalog for that part. So again, it becomes important when you're looking at your inventory list. You also can, if you wanted to, print by a line code, you can print by group or just print a particular department. So if I just wanted my batteries, if they're set up right, and I just wanted my consigned batteries, then I simply would print that list out. And then that would give me everybody that I have as a status of consigned. So status-wise, we have consigned, stocking, and non-stock. So when we look at our inventory, what becomes important is just, again, being able to see the most important reports you're going to be using, the reports that make the most difference. Again, your stock value needs to be run at the end of the month or the end of the year, because that stock value is of that date. So it becomes important at the end of the year if you want to know your stock value to run that report at the end of the year. If I'm going to run through, and I'll spend more time on the reports as we continue the different trainings that you can look up your individual parts, but if I want to look at sales histories by a department, I could do that. In this particular case, if I want to look at my sales history of, let's say, a department of batteries, then I simply would hit that, and it's simply going to give me an overview of my 12 months of sales by what I have in inventory, marked as consigned or marked as stock or non-stock. So you can see your 30-day usage if it was calculating that, and you can see your sales. Again, so you're able to see your sales history based on your reports. You can go in and look at a single part and say, how many of those single parts have I sold in a particular date range. So if I went in and just simply picked on a part, and let's say I wanted to look at a date range, I could do that, and it would simply give me all the sales history of a single part. In this case, I haven't sold any, so it's not going to bring me back any of that sales history. So again, as we go through inventory, what I want to spend time on is the importance of setting up your inventory, and then how to manage using inventory valves, and then manage your different reports themselves. So as we look at our stocks value detail report, that's going to become one of your most important reports. And so that's just for the inventory. In this case, I want to do all parts, all departments. And as I do this, it's automatically going to put those on screen, and this is going to match your parts value summary report. And this is where we can see each one of your parts, and then the detail of what you have in inventory, and then how each one of those inventories are in, what their cost is, total cost, and then your price each, and then the total value of your inventory. So when you're looking at your inventory, again, you want to be able to look at your inventory items, be able to look at reports, look at which reports you're going to run, and then how to edit your different inventory items. So with this is part one of the inventory training class. And then my next training class, I will get into the parts browse feature.